Liubliana, 2 glasses of absinthe, and I'm completely blind.
Not to go into too much detail about the project, ELMCIP stands for electronic literature.
English artists are very much busy trying to
Everything that happens online is questioning any systems because there's no clear separation between the system and the law.
Yeah, kind of mediation is taken to extremes, so that movement creates the pretense of a reform with another text taken not from the spirit.
That is a very complicated question. How did you come up with that question?
There is a politics of digital poetics, I think, now because of the problem of Google, because you have this large global corporation that does a huge amount of processing of language. So there are interventions that the poetic practitioners could make. In other words, people who are supposedly schooled in digital devices, digital aspects of digital culture, who also have literary interests, and they could make interventions that would be seriously political at this particular moment. But the moment for that is passing, and because the idea that you would be able to make any significant effect would be very difficult.
One could almost consider it unfair to ask that question, that kind of question at that time.
Oh my God, I think there's none. That's honest.
How can you think about this after these kind of experiences we had? So, would you like to rephrase your question?
Well, in French, l'entrespace is actually a third place. I mean, in English, in between seems to indicate, there's one or the other, but the in between isn't. It means that something isn't either one or the other, but there isn't a defined space for what it is. So, having lived in a French place most of my adult life, I go for the French idea of l'entrespace being a space. I certainly think of it as a cognitive space. It's where processing, a kind of mental acuity is required to write into that space. I think if there is an engagement in a work with an entrespace, if an entrespace is employed and is considered as one of the spatial elements of the work, then the text and the image both become can more easily be accepted as fragments, and the entrespace as the cognitive space in which the narrative that joins those fragments together can evolve.
Well, there's probably a sort of synesthetic moment that we try to inhabit, where we still have, I hope, we still have some sort of semantic intent, but we activate other parts of the sensorium.
The in-between image and text for me is that space that allows me to think, to express myself. I think that, perhaps many artists move also in between that area of image and text, So you don't concentrate on one linguistic system or on the kind of image sign system, but it's more a kind of mixed environment that you feel more comfortable in finding your own language.
This is a ridiculous question because you're talking about. There's a problem of medium, what the textual medium is, or what the medium of language is. This is one of the things that concerns me greatly. With image, there's a whole range of practices in which the medium is clear. People know that they can be expert in it. They can develop skills and techniques in relation to it. With language, everybody is an expert. Everybody uses language all the time. So so there's this problem of what the medium of an aesthetic practice of language is. So that sort of skewed cultural situation will always sort of pervert and distort the relationship between image and text.
He's on vacation.
The author is in the words and in the system and in the variables.
Okay, I will say that yes, I'm very. I think that the smell of books really counts for the kind of experience of the book, and I used to love smelling my books when I started my new curriculums when I was a child. It made me want to read them when I have that kind of nice smell. But recently I read more digitally than books, and most of the books that I read, they've been overused because I use the ones from libraries. So I think that it smells of human beings.
It depends on where books have been. For example, when I buy used books on Amazon, I really like the moment when I get the envelope and when I open it and there is a smell. When you buy a used book, there's always a smell. And you can imagine where it comes from, perhaps from a library or from a personal apartment or from a public space, I don't know. It participates in some way to a pleasure of the book. Yeah. And you must know that some time ago, 2008, I made a survey with some students, 600 students, and they compared the reading experience with paper books and on the computer. And many students really insisted on the smell. This is weird, eh? On the smell, on the tactile sensations, and also on the thickness of the book. And it was very important to them. So I was really impressed.
Origami girl, folding paper cuts your hands. You need more band-aids.
then I would say that Facebook is the beginning. I don't know. I would actually, if I would get serious, I think that's it's not just Google, you know, it's also other, especially social networks. I think there is a huge issue with privacy.
It's certainly a good statement. I thought it's the beginning of a new world, which also means naturally that it is the end of the old world. And I would subscribe to that.
Google is controlling a lot of the data, a lot of our data. Are they an evil entity? I don't know. I think you sort of need to look at it in a balanced way.
Google is processes more text than any other sort of corporation device on the planet. It's a linguistically based process primarily at the moment. It is producing a huge statistical model of language, and linguistic practitioners are not on board. And this is a shocking state of affairs, and it's commensurate with the same sort of issue that we have in the financial markets, where 75% of the decision making is made by algorithms, and we're probably approaching a moment in culture where the same proportion of cultural decisions will be made by algorithms. Many of those algorithms will be owned by Google, and many of them are already owned by Google. So Google is maybe not the end of the world, but it's at the end of culture. It's the end of many institutions.
Well, in best possible way, it's a very curious person dealing with his subject with some, let's say, professional tools or scientific tools. I'm talking about the mythology, or there's some coherent theoretical approach to the subject.
All of the classical and especially medieval engravings of scholars are miserable hunchbacked people sitting over desks. Erasmus with the follies of the poets and scholars and grammarians, or like they have a whole chapter in The Ship of Fools, and I just think that's, on the one hand, being self-perpetuated, and on the other hand, completely preposterous. If you think of instead what's a researcher is a more interesting question. I think, or just perhaps research is more interesting. So maybe it's that there's researchers are out doing things, and research can really be anything. Scholars are sitting hunched over desks writing up the reports. I really don't know what the distinction is, but I think research can be anything, and I think writing is research. So, and reading is writing, and to me it's a very active, iterative process, and the more that scholarship directly engages with that kind of creative research, the more interesting it can be.
Yes, I think so. But it depends on the work. You cannot generalize it. I think that reading takes place when there are texts and when there are interesting texts, and when there is actually something to read and worth reading. And when it is the case, reading will take place.
Yeah, the only thing is that I don't think that we can just call it reading in the understanding of reading. Perhaps in a traditional sense, the reading that is taking place is a different way of reading, where you kind of also looking and reading at the same time. So, yeah.
The interesting thing for me, I don't know, or at least that's my experience, it's that the gallery space, it's much more open to electronic literature than the world of literature, you know, like usual places for readings or libraries or schools even, you know. I don't find them that open. I think that's much more going on inside the world of art in this regard.
In that way, reverse communication, as I said, could be able to dismantle meanings.
Of course it is possible, because literature is basically about language. And personally, I experienced this huge difficulty to translate my own texts in another language. Why? Because you lose something when you translate. Perhaps you also gain something, but you definitely lose something. And I think that, for example, Francophone digital literature exists, and it has its specificities which are in the French language, and it's just so incredibly difficult to translate. And you should accept that yes, there are different languages for this literature, and that it's not always possible to go instantly towards English.
I find that very difficult. I don't think that I don't think that you can have a national electronic literature, and probably the point is of electronic literature. The point probably is of not being national, but being more across boundaries and kind of multilingual communities.
Skeleton Bridge. Why are you covered in flowers?
Well, electronic literature is not a real term. You might use digital literature temporarily. The it's overdetermined by some spurious notion of media. There will be literature. Literature exists. The idea that there is digital literature is just a passing phase. There might be electronic literature because in the same way that there's electronic music, there will be a very specialist practice which will involve algorithm computation, certain types of technical manipulation of language, but it'll be for the next few years it'll be extremely marginal, and it won't catch up with electronic music per se for a good while yet. But then the term will have meaning. Until then, it has no meaning.
Okay.
Well, I think it does. I don't know what we call electronic literature, or what it is or what it isn't, but I think I'm going to keep doing the things that I do, and I think they're very accessible. I think that the venues for electronic literature are not there yet. I think the work's more interesting than what we're doing with it and how we're talking about it.
Yes, I think so. You want me to develop? Yeah. I think that the future I'm just curious about what the future will be. I don't know this future. It's perhaps even not in our community, and perhaps even not in our field. It's perhaps elsewhere. But when I observe my students and what they do, for example, in one seminar that I make with them, and in this seminar I introduce digital literature as a theory and also as a practice, and just when I see what they do, I see the future, and I'm very happy to see this. And I also see the future elsewhere, for example in literary blogs, in some literary forms which are developed for the iPad. So I'm just curious, but I think that yes, there's a future, and perhaps not in the place where we think it will be.
Yeah, I think it does. You know, I think it will. I doubt it will reach some huge popularity, but I think there is. It's in development, actually. So I think that it develops together with technology, and technology is now really blooming. You know, and there's tons of different things that we haven't tried. You know, with touch interfaces or location-aware issues, and so on. I think there's plenty to research.
No, I don't. I never thought.
Why?
Doesn't work. The whole concept contradicts itself. I mean, it can't be literature if it wants to be digital literature, right? So it can only work as something else than literature. And that doesn't work either.
Okay.
Next question.